Hello and welcome to this, the 14th in our series of webinars related to North Carolina's attempts to recover from and react to the impacts of the coronavirus. This particular show is the second in our series that we call Jumpstart, which is looking at the ways that places and key institutions in North Carolina are looking to jumpstart as we begin our recovery from the initial impacts of the coronavirus. All meetings in this series are sponsored by Tony Brown, a member of our National Advisory Board, a leader of the Public Consulting Group, and this week's show is in honor of his daughter, All-American NC State volleyball player Julia Brown. Thank you to Tony for his sponsorship. I'm Leslie Bonin. I'd like to thank you for joining us at this special time of 8 a.m. This is a 1 week only thing. We're changing the time of the show this week only. We'll be back at 9 o'clock next week. If you're interested in past webinars that we've talked about as part of this series, they are all on our website, emergingissues.org. We'd ask you to just click on the COVID-19 resource page to find our look at the impact of the pandemic on food and hunger, law enforcement and the courts, small business, entrepreneurship, religion, and many other topics. One special announcement before we get started, we're going to have a special webinar tomorrow at 9 a.m. about our new grant program called Band NC. Band NC is designed to provide small grants to county-level efforts to expand digital inclusion. If you'd like more information on that workshop and the program, go to our website, emergingissues.org. Again, that is tomorrow at 9 a.m. Today is the second in our series about jumpstarting North Carolina. Last week we talked about jumpstarting tourism and the real challenges that the tourism sector faces. And that has some impact on our topic today. Today is a discussion of the impact of coronavirus on local government operations. We'd ask you to send in your questions and join a lively chat discussion that always goes on the right side of your screen. So you can participate, share ideas there, and I'll also be following the questions that you ask and giving them to our guests as appropriate. I'd like to start off with just a quick summary of what local government is and does, because a lot of local government is invisible. You turn on your tap and water comes out. You flush your toilet and it flushes. In many cases, if you turn on your power, there's a local government agency that's allied with that. Your pothole gets fixed. The garbage gets collected. That new school you've been agitating for gets built. Social services get delivered. Your daughter gets a gym to play in. Police or sheriffs come when you call. Fire gets put out. That's local government. Local governments also purchase from local businesses. They employ your neighbors. And they support a range of other services that get delivered in your community, whether they do that or not. In terms of revenue, they get money from a variety of sources, including property taxes, payment on water and power bills, sales tax, accommodations tax. Every one of those sources is compromised right now as we go through this pandemic. And this is budget season. You've been following things in your local papers, you know that many counties, many municipalities have been voting this week on next year's budget. And in many cases, they're doing it semi-blind. We want to talk about that. So today, I want to look at what the problems that local governments are facing, what they're doing to put together budgets this year, what that could mean for you and your family next year, and how they're planning to move forward. Has anything changed? Is there anything that we're learning through this pandemic that's going to change our permanent behavior? Statewide, there are some 552 municipalities, 100 county governments. There's the Qualla boundary. There are local school systems and other local government agencies. We're not talking about schools and some of those other agencies today. We're mostly focusing on local government in the form of county, city, and town governments. Those organizations don't do everything themselves. In some cases, they contract with local entities or other nonprofit businesses to provide services. But if you add up all these entities together, they have a total of 258,933 employees. And the pandemic is causing huge problems. Paul Meyer, who's the executive director of the North Carolina League of Municipalities, calls the financial crisis the economic fight of our lives. Today, we want to look at what's happening during coronavirus, what they're doing about it, what impact it can have on all of us, and we have three great guests. We're really honored to have them. Avril Pinder is the Buncombe County Manager. Gloristine Brown is the Mayor of Bethel and member of the board of the North Carolina League of Municipalities and President of the North Carolina Mayors Association. And Paige Worsham, Associate General Counsel for the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners. So first of all, let me just acknowledge that I know this is a crazy busy time for all of you as you and your units of government try to get ready for a budget year that begins in less than 2 weeks. Avril, we're going to talk more in depth about this a little bit later, but I wonder if you could just give us a quick snapshot of why preparing this year's budget has been so hard.
Thanks, and good morning to everyone. This year's budget was like none other, and I've had 25 years in local government now. So to come into a budget where in January and February, life was great. We started our budget process last October, where we start looking at capital projects and we start projecting on revenues. And then March 12th hit, and we all went into a state of emergency. And at that time, we were still thinking short term, not forever. But then it went on and it went on, and 10 weeks later, we still in a pandemic and still don't know when it's going to end. And we saw a huge decrease in our sales tax. When the stay-at-home order went in and people stayed home, sales dropped. We didn't have the retail sales that we were having anymore. Then unemployment hit, like we've never seen in North Carolina or in Buncombe County. In February, our unemployment numbers were like 2.9% unemployment, and in March, and right now where we are is 17% unemployment in our metropolitan area. That's huge for us. And in Buncombe County specifically, not just the metropolitan area, is 20%. That's 1 in 5 people not working. So we knew we would have a huge reduction in sales tax, but also in our property tax collection. And those two revenue sources are the largest sources for our general fund revenue. So we knew going into next year, we don't have a clue, quite honestly, of what we will see and when it would come back. So we were extremely conservative in trying to plan. In your opening comments, you mentioned the services that local government provide for the community. Without those services, a lot of people, especially for county government, social services, they come to us when they're in need. We know that they need food and they need shelter. Without revenues, we can't provide that. So the impact is not just on local government and the employees that we have, it's on our community system-wide. And that was the struggle that we had. And we can't really raise tax revenue, which is our go-to in prior year, because there's no one there that's going to be able to pay because they're not working. So our collection rate, we believe, is going to be very, very much impacted on collecting our property taxes and our sales tax. So for us, that was our struggle, knowing that the unemployment rate is there, knowing that now is the need for most services, and we don't have that to provide to them. We have appropriated in our budget this year over $11 million in fund balance. So that's our safety net to make sure we continue to provide service to our constituents. And it's hard because you can't provide fund balance year over year because that's a one-time revenue source. So that's the struggle that we're having. How do you start to replenish your fund balance? How do you start to build your economy back when you don't know when this pandemic is going to end?
Thank you. Mayor Brown, you have got a considerably smaller budget and don't necessarily have an $11 million fund balance to draw on. What's this been like for you trying to plan for next year?
Pretty much what Mrs. Pinder was talking. We just, our thoughts was one way, and what our plans were to do a lot of things that within the community. And then when this pandemic hit, all ideas went out the window because we had to look at actually hoping that we wouldn't have to do a lot of cutback, but being very small. The sales, like she said, the sales tax, I mean, we don't know where we're going to be. And definitely I hope we don't take a great hit, with the power bill money, but I think take a great impact on us. And with the governor putting in place the waiver for your utilities and all, I think a lot of people, they're just not paying at all, and they had a misunderstanding. But we really try to make them understand that it didn't mean not pay anything, but do what you can. Excuse me, and that has been a great impact. But we just took a budget. Excuse me, the manager just took the budget and looked at it, and the finance officer, and we pretty much piggyback on the past budget, and we went from there. Because like she said, we just don't know what's going to happen, and our plans on raises and things like that just went out the window. But thank God our employees understand.
We're going to come back to both of you to talk through your particular situation, but also how you're thinking about it. I just wanted to turn to Paige to kind of give us a big picture view. Paige, we talked about some of the functions of local government. I wonder if you could just review it again. So as we think about cuts and how people are making the adjustments, what sorts of services we're talking about.
Sure. Thanks, Leslie, and thanks for having me here today. It really, as you mentioned at the beginning, it really kind of spans a wide range of things that are both very visible to residents in the state of North Carolina and may not be as apparent. I think, Mayor Brown just touched on Powell bill money and roads that cities are responsible for. And, obviously that is something that people take for granted that's going to be, maintained and usable. And that's something that municipalities all across the state are responsible for. On the county side, there are, things that are directly affecting the response to the pandemic. Counties are responsible for local health departments. And so, one of the first, I would say, kind of impacts that you see with this virus is contact tracing of people who are testing for COVID, and they go to their local health department. As Manager Pinder mentioned, social services and helping people get those resources that they need. Public safety and law enforcement on both the city and the county side. Those are all local government services, and those are kind of, I would say, the big ones, like that you're really seeing right now and are really apparent. And then there are all these other things, trash pickup, animal control, airports authority, libraries, these things that are just so, I would say, intertwined with everyday life, and you kind of expect them to be there, and you use them and you enjoy them. And they are either required to be provided by the local government. Either the state has required the local government to, pay for this service and offer this service, or there's something that the local government has decided is in their discretion, and they may have some budget that they can put toward that service. And so those types of things are both going to be really impacted by the revenue challenges that you mentioned, both those mandatory services that local governments provide, and then also the services that they want to provide. So there really is a long list, I think, both visible and maybe sometimes less visible.
Can you talk just a little bit about those revenue sources and exactly what they are and why they're challenged? Just at a really high level, there are 4 sources. There are also service fees and other things that are important to cities and counties and towns.
Absolutely. So the 4 main ones that I think, and these may differ depending on where in the state you are, or maybe whether or not you have a utility. But the 4 main sources that are really going to be impacted by the public health crisis are sales tax is the first one, and that's the one that is expected to see the largest impact is seeing the largest impact. As Avril mentioned, when people are not buying things, when people are not shopping, when people are not traveling and visiting places as tourists, sales tax revenues they go down, and sales tax flows to both local governments and the state. So when you hear about, this is going to impact government budgets at both the state level and the local government level, sales tax is really a driver of that. And, I think that property tax is one where we're not going to yet see the full impact of property tax for a little while. Several local governments, I would say likely all local governments, expect to see some change in how much property tax they bring in. Perhaps, businesses are not able to pay their property taxes, and so the tax base itself declines in the local government, or due to financial reasons and economic hardship, individual taxpayers are not able to pay their property tax, or maybe there's a change in their situation. And so that statewide is going to also see an impact, and it may not happen immediately. It may not happen until the next fiscal year. Occupancy tax, you also referred to this, Leslie, as accommodations tax, is when you go and you stay in a hotel or you stay in an Airbnb somewhere, the local government takes a tax on that accommodation. And so that really does contribute to the ability of the local government to offer tourism experiences and support the tourism in their area, and makes people want to continue going. And so that's a very significant revenue source that, if people aren't traveling, is going to be impacted. And then finally, as Mayor Brown mentioned, there is a prohibition that's been put in place by an executive order that prohibits local governments from disconnecting utility, so water, sewer, electricity customers for non-payment. And there's a direct correlation to needing to be able to wash your hands and continue to keep the lights on during a public health crisis. But the local governments are covering that cost, and they had suspended disconnections even before the executive order came out, because they saw this as a need. But of course, someone has to pay for it somewhere, and so right now it's the local government. And so in addition to these four, there's also permitting fees, building inspection fees, a variety of other fees that local governments are seeing an impact to, or will in the upcoming fiscal year as things continue.
Yeah, so we're seeing a slide now that kind of outlines some of the responses that counties are taking to this, and the responses are very similar for municipalities as well. Can you just, from your perspective with the state association, just maybe do a super big overview, and then we'll turn to Ms. Pinder to talk about the specific impact this is having in Buncombe County.
Absolutely. I think an important point to all of this is that both local governments and the state are required to balance their budgets. So I think that kind of underlies everything when we talk about this. So you don't see that at the federal level, that there's a requirement that the budget gets balanced. It's in the Constitution in North Carolina. So if you're bringing in fewer revenues, or if you don't know what your revenue situation is, but it's going to be impacted significantly, then you have to spend less money. So those are the only things that you can do. You have to either raise rates or raise fees, raise taxes, which, as Avril said, is not it's not feasible right now. So a lot of local governments, I would say all local governments, are conservatively budgeting. They don't know what to expect. Everyone is seeing already decreased revenues and expecting more decreased revenues. Some projected budget impacts range up to a negative 20% change from what they expended for services and programs over the previous year. There are workforce impacts happening in terms of there might be some hiring freezes, furloughs. You've heard Wake County passed its budget and it eliminated, I think, 100 positions out of county government. That's obviously one of the bigger local governments in the state. As Buncombe is doing, some local governments do have a fund balance, and this is the purpose of fund balance: is you spend it when you need it in an emergency situation, and that's where we are. So the concern, of course, will be once you spend it, it's no longer there, and you're having less revenues to build it back up. Lots of local governments may have planned to build something, a big infrastructure project. Counties are responsible for building schools, and there's likely a freeze on any kind of big expenditure because you don't know if you're going to have the money to pay for it. And then finally, I think an important
let me just
oh,
pause
sorry,
there.
Leslie.
Let me just pause there because I want to get back to this slide and spend a little bit more time on it in the future. But I wanted to turn to Ms. Pinder from Buncombe County. One, because she's right in the middle of thinking about all these things, but two, she's also got an uncancelable meeting at 8:30. So I wanted to just hear from her a little bit about how she's thinking about this. So Avril, we've just been looking at this slide talking about the tough decisions that counties are going to make. And I just wonder if you could speak to that from Buncombe County's perspective. We had on our show last week people from the tourism sector, the head of the Biltmore, who was talking about the impact that this has had. We also know occupancy or accommodations, occupancy in hotels and motels is way down. That's a key source of revenue for you. What's the hardest decision you had to make to get the budget passed on this past Tuesday?
The first decision that we made was really a commitment to our staff. We told our staff we would not be looking at furloughs or layoffs. So when you make that kind of commitment, that is really the largest part of your budget, salaries. So when you make that commitment, you have to look at programs and services beyond that. But once we made that commitment, it was really freeing because I knew that I couldn't touch that one revenue, that one expenditure source. But our staff really stepped in and started to see what else could we do and how can we deliver services differently and in a different way. So it became really a conversation with all staff members. Typically, you work with your department heads to set your budget. This became even further down, and staff started stepping in to see what they could do. I would say my Parks and Recreation department really closed because we didn't want that close contact in our parks. They all went and took classes at our community college to become ambulance drivers. So we repurposed staff. Instead of having to look for ambulance drivers later, they're now stepping in for that because we have more calls for COVID-19. So in the past, we will look at temp services or temp employees to become emergency services. Our recreation department has stepped into that. We also have an epidemiologist team that help us to look at programs and analyze data so we know how to respond to COVID. Our librarians and our reference librarians that are great at research stepped into that role. So instead of spending on temporary salaries or contracted services, our employees took on dual roles. So we were able to cut back on those expenses. So it became a conversation around our employees. How do we think innovative and outside of the box to really control costs going into the future? So that was a big thing for us. How do we change and not contract for services that we normally would have before? We brought services back in and we reduced several contracts. On the flip side of that, bringing services back in meant that there were programs that were no longer putting money into the economy and providing a paycheck for somebody else outside of county government. And Buncombe County, realizing that we had that huge unemployment and realizing that we're now pulling back from certain money that we were putting into the economy, started a One Buncombe Fund. And we went and we started fundraising. And that's what we did, soliciting and fundraising donations to make sure we can provide funds to help the economy. So we have a nonprofit here in Buncombe County that is run by Buncombe County. That nonprofit raised $1.3 million to help give loans to local employees as well as businesses. So that took care of how we can pull money back in by doing that fundraising piece. Beyond that, one of the biggest things that we started to work on then was once we can cut expenses, what can we look on the revenue side to make sure we are balanced? It really came down to thinking, and I believe our budget is actually going to be about 2% less, 1.1% less than it was in prior year, because we were able to cut expenses by staff taking on dual roles, stepping into other relationships that they would never had thought they could do before. So that was the biggest thing for us. We repurposed staff to do more than one job here at Buncombe County.
Interested in hearing a little bit more about the One Buncombe Fund as a model. I know a few years ago, Detroit, when people were having trouble paying their water bills, they created essentially a nonprofit arm that enabled people to contribute to a fund that enabled people to get out of debt. Is that a model that you see growing in the future, or is this something that you do in crisis that does not continue after the pandemic is over?
So we had a nonprofit for a long time. It was called the Buncombe Service Fund, and it was smaller. It wasn't as big as $1 million, but it's been in place where people can apply for aid and get donations to help. So we do, through our social services, we have general assistance that can help with whether it's water and sewer bills or food. But this service foundation also took donations, and we also ran that to help people. We scaled it up for this emergency. And we've also helped other counties around us to set up their own nonprofit as well. So what we've been working on here is not to disband this. We increased the board membership to make sure we had good community representatives so it could be more transparent. That might go away. The board piece will go away, but the foundation itself would stay, and we will continue to help other counties learn how to go ahead and do this in their own locations. We've worked with a community development organization here in Buncombe County that can help us understand how to give loans to businesses. We've helped retain jobs through, I think, 700 loans to businesses at this point, and over 1,000 loans to nonprofit for individuals. We also have nonprofits that can apply for funding as well. So it's not something that we're going to turn around and cut and stop, because it's been so successful. And I will tell you, there's so many testimonials from small businesses. We focus on small businesses and women-owned businesses and historically underutilized businesses as well, to really make sure that they have the wherewithal to continue running. We know that the small business that we have are the backbone of our economy here in Buncombe County. So we really strive to keep them occupied and working and keep employees working.
One last thing is, I know you've got to go, but I just want to make sure people understand how uncertain your budget is. So you mentioned there was uncertainty. When are you going to find out how much in sales tax Buncombe County collected over the last 3 months of the fiscal year?
That happens in September. There's a 3-month lag on sales tax. So we wouldn't know in June what happens in June until September. So you really don't know at the end of the fiscal year where you stand until September, which is 3 months into the new fiscal year. So that's always a struggle to figure out where you end the year and what truly you have in revenues and fund balance until 3 months into the next year.
All right. Buncombe County Manager Avril Pinder, thank you so much for being with us. I know you've got to get to a staff meeting to explain what just happened in the budget meeting on Tuesday. Yes. So thank you so much for doing it during this crazy busy season.
I appreciate you guys. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. As we transition from Ms. Pinder to Ms. Brown, I just wanted to show a slide, if I could, that illustrates a little bit about some of the relief that counties are getting, because it's become somewhat controversial. The way the CARES Act works, there is relief to counties of a certain size and cities of a certain size, and the General Assembly has also appropriated $150 million for the remainder of the counties by formula. So each county gets a minimum of $250,000. And so there is some relief coming from the federal government through the state for counties that are having trouble making budget. That same relief, in some cases, is distributed by counties further to cities and towns, but not necessarily. And that's part of the increased uncertainty that Mayor Gloristine Brown faces with the town of Bethel. Can you talk a little bit about, I noticed that your predecessor as head of the Mayor's Association, Bob Scott, noted that he was facing a 30% loss of revenue, and he called for the General Assembly to appropriate an additional $150 million for municipalities in the same way that has been appropriated to counties. And mayors across the state are writing to U.S. senators and local representatives. Why is that funding important for you? And when do you get a sense that you'll get word as to whether that's coming or not?
Well, it's real important, and talking with my colleagues like Bob Scott and some others, which are suffering a lot worse than my little town is. We were very disappointed that we were not included and into this, and we were okay. You said we could be straight up here, and I'm going to speak my heart, and I'm very disappointed that municipalities were not included, because we at no fault to our own that this pandemic, we had things that to happen, and we are really losing a lot of revenue here. The county they were dispersed some monies passed down, but as you said, that they have the discretion of whether to share with the municipalities or not. And I think some of the counties, from my understanding, are reaching out to a lot of their municipalities, excuse me, to see what their needs are. But this money is only used, from my understanding, is used for the COVID. It's only spent towards that. And then we were told that my manager, we were told that they were asking us to apply for FEMA first to see if we can get a reimbursement back for the monies that we've lost. And then if not, then we come to the county, and then they will reimburse us back whatever our needs are. So, but yeah, if a lot of towns, and I'm afraid, especially smaller towns, if we don't get in help, I think I'm almost sure that some of them probably may look to have to. I hope not to shut down, but it's a lot. It's going to be a lot of cuts. It's going to be a lot of things that's going to have to be taken away. So we want to keep, if we can just keep our communities going, especially for our citizens, to make sure our citizens get the needs that they are looking for, because they are still looking to us to continue to do the things that we once we're doing, and they're not understanding that you should have the money. The money should be there, but they're not really understanding, because they don't look at the day-to-day operation. So it has taken a huge hit for a lot of my colleagues, and I'm really worried and a little nervous. It really makes me nervous, but I'm just a little upset that municipalities were not thought about, and we're at I call it the bottom of the totem pole, the last minute fix, as they say.
During the Great Depression, there were 62 counties and 152 cities and towns in North Carolina that went into debt. And at that point, the state came in and took over some services. The local government commission was created, and I think the idea was to keep a close eye on cities and counties and really see in a distant warning way what was happening. And local government commission in some cases has intervened. I know last year was it Eureka in Wayne County? They came in and took over the local wastewater system because it was not working for that town. You've been talking about consolidation of water systems yourself, even before this pandemic. I'm wondering where the conversation is about that, and whether there are other kind of efficiencies that towns and counties are going to be asked to look at now that maybe they hadn't thought about as much before.
Yes, we are. What little bit I can say, we are looking to hopefully merge with Greenville Utilities. Being a small community, we just realized that we cannot go on taking on loans. It's just, you just can't do it. And in order not to become a Eureka, because if we keep going the way that we're going, we will be another one that probably LGC would come in and say, okay, we have to shut you down. We got to take over and do what we need to do. So, and like I said, and we're having a good manager and a good board, and we're having a manager to just, he's fairly new, but he jumped right in running, and we realized that we had to go and talk to someone. Manager and I worked well together, and realized that regionalization is going to be, in my opinion, the key for a lot of small towns, because it's easy to say, yes, you can get the loans. I mean, they're out there, but the bottom line is you got to look at your population. And you cannot, and we are in a community where we do have a lot of elderly, and you cannot keep increasing the rates, because LGC is going to come after you. And I'm saying it in a nice way, but they're doing their job, and you can't get upset with them. But when they are telling you that, excuse me, that your rates are not where they need to be, and then you having to look at the citizens because your tax base is not that great. I mean, we don't have a lot of industry here, and we still need a lot more rooftops in order, if we were talking about keeping our system and maintaining it ourselves, we would have to raise the rates. The rates would have to, in order to keep up. But you just cannot afford to do that because you have other bills as well. And the citizens just can't handle that pressure, in my opinion.
You were on a tight margin before, and now people see this order coming out saying you can't be penalized or can't be disconnected if you don't pay. Some people can't pay because they're unemployed.
Right.
How do you deal with that? It's just there's so many different things to balance there.
Yeah, it's hard, Leslie. It is very hard because, again, like I expressed earlier, when you're trying to explain to your citizens because they're not understanding, you have a lot that will say, well, the governor said that, you can't turn me off, you can't do this, you can't, yet understood. But he did not say that you did not have to pay your bill if you're able. And I tell a lot of my citizens, I said, if you're not able to pay the full amount, please pay something. Just pay something, because at the end of the day, when you go back and look, there's going to be a huge amount. And then when that order is over, that, the municipalities have the right to go into, discontinue your service because of non-payment. I mean, I know within this pandemic period that I think in the order it said that we have to work with them, I think 6 months on that particular part, if I'm not mistaken. And but you still have the bill still goes on. So it's been really hard in trying to educate. And I think that's the biggest part. A lot of the citizens are not being educated enough to understand what is being put out here before them. And therefore, that's why they come at you to say, I expect this, I expect that. So I think education is key here to really making the citizens, help them to understand exactly how the municipalities itself is being impacted by this pandemic.
Ask this question to both you and Paige. Eric Reese reminds us that earlier this week, the General Assembly appropriated some funding to community action agencies to help people up to 200% of poverty that are having trouble paying those sorts of bills. And wondering whether earlier Ms. Pinder mentioned possibility of raising funds privately to help with that stopgap measure, the one Buncombe Fund, I think she called it, that she has. Wondering whether that is a potential solution here.
You talking to? Well, I thought you were talking to Paige. I didn't. Okay, yeah, I just saw a little bit of that. I haven't really read up on how that is going to. But I'm hoping that will. I don't know if the monies are going directly to. I guess they have to go and apply, and I don't know how that formula is going to work. If they apply, will the money come straight to whomever, whatever utility bill or whatever your rent, or go straight to the person themselves, and they are responsible for paying out the bill. But if that's the case, I hope that it sounds like a good thing, and I'm hoping that it will work the way that it's intended to work. And if so, that will be a big plus for a lot of us. That would help us out a lot.
Hey, let me go back to that slide you were talking over a few minutes ago. It was really looking at the various solutions that, in your case, counties, but many cities are thinking about as well. And you were talking about the different options that people were thinking about. Mayor Brown has expedited some thinking about consolidation of her water system with the nearby municipal water system for some efficiency. What are some other things that you've been hearing about as you've talked with county managers across the state?
It's a really important question, Leslie, and I think that local governments are trying to figure it out as quickly as they possibly can to meet that July 1st budget passage deadline. But the conversation and I think the creativity is going to need to continue, and it will continue. Uh, in addition to all of these things that we're hearing about, and I think it's really important to talk about the assistance that's coming from other places, in addition to the federal funding, and then the CAA funding that was referenced that comes from a block grant, $26 million for rent and utilities. I think all of those are really important pieces to the puzzle, and local governments are going to have to reassess several months down the line. Avril mentioned the way that the sales tax process works in North Carolina. Local governments are only just now seeing the impact from March and April sales, and so I think once those numbers start coming in, it's going to be later in the fall, and local governments are going to have to take another look at their budgets, and they may have to do some pretty significant budget amendments to either increase what they plan to expend, or maybe take out a fund balance, or maybe there'll be some positive news and they can make some other changes. So it's kind of, I don't want to say that budgets are static in the past, but it seems like this year and for the next few years, it really is going to be a kind of a moving, continuing process to figure things out and to take another look. And I think that local governments they're going to continue doing things like trying to work with their small businesses and their nonprofits and their taxpayers on both utility and rental kind of assistance, and work within the parameters of the funds that are placed on them. There are some rules as to how you can spend those funds or not spend those funds. So I think that local governments are being very creative in how they can help the local economies, because of course that's so important, because you're not going to get sales tax regardless of what's going on externally if you don't have those businesses.
Thank you. One clarification, Patricia Whalen notes in the chat that the One Buncombe funds flow directly to the vendors, so they don't go to the individual first, they go directly to the vendors. So my apologies for confusing that. Paige, talk just a little bit about the follow-on effects of this. Let's say, just completely hypothetically, there's a vaccine in January, and so we're kind of beginning to get beyond this by the end of next fiscal year. There's still going to be follow-on effects for municipalities and counties in the years to come. Can you just sort of play out why that's going to be the case?
Sure. I have over the past few months, we at the association try to support counties and as we can, and it's very challenging to try to predict things. And I know nobody is wanting to predict anything, but I think that human nature is still going to be cautious. So I think from maybe the mitigation perspective, from the public health perspective, even if a vaccination comes out, people may be less likely to travel as much as they did and make some of the same purchasing decisions. So I think that the sales tax ramifications are still going to be happening. If businesses, that things change with businesses and they take time to reopen or restart, I think that those are going to impact all sorts of property tax and utility revenue and all of those things that kind of flow from that. And then I think that kind of the larger budget picture is to go back to what we talked about at the beginning of the call, is there are all these programs and services that local governments have kind of built up, and they continue to grow for the past, I would say, really 5 years of strong kind of growth and sales tax growth in the state of North Carolina, and adding new things for residents, and using discretionary spending if they have some money to spend in that manner. And so those things will be, I don't want to say that they'll be eliminated because I doubt that's the situation. I think local governments will try to find a way to provide them, but I think that they'll be looked at and examined very closely. And so I think that residents may, I'm sure that local governments will try not to show any change to their residents and services and programs provided, but I think that will be something that we'll continue to receive a close look. And do we have the money to pay for this? And if something were to happen again, are we going to have to build up our fund balance again to handle it?
Um, Question coming in via chat, and I'll ask both of you to think about it. Without knowing exactly what it's going to look like, with increased calls to reappropriate some of the funding for sheriff's departments or police departments, uh, what impact is that going to have on budgets? So I think the argument is that some of it should go out of the traditional direct policing and sheriff's office behaviors of the past and more toward prevention and other sort of social service related things. What impact do you see that having? Is that going to be net neutral, or does that ultimately help with the budget situation that you have, or is that an additional cost? Mayor Brown, do you have any thoughts on that?
Um, well, having such a small department, we do have a police department here, but it's very small. Um, I actually think that you, well, I don't think it will have such an impact for us anyway, because right now, actually, our chief of police, when she did her budget, she actually minimized her budget some more. She did make some extra cuts within her budget, but I think I know that they're talking this out here about the defunding, of police departments and all of that. But I just want to make sure that when you do that, defunding, in my opinion, is not to necessarily say disband the department, but I think we need to put in proper, uh, make sure that the police have the tools that they need in order to perform their duties. And that, I mean, whatever it comes from education to whatever they need in order to improve their duties or make themselves better for the public. And I mean, and sometimes it may be, excuse me, if you have to cut, but make sure your cuts don't cut what they need. That's what I'm saying. And I really don't have a lot to say on that, but we're very small. But our police chief, she's very cautious in the things that she does and make sure that her department has what it needs. But at the same time, we got to make sure that our citizens are safe and protected, most of all. And that's what we want to try to make sure that they have all the tools that they need to do their duties. If that helps or come a little close to what you're talking about.
Paige, purely from a budget standpoint, do you see reappropriation as net neutral, or is that an additional cost, or is it a long-term savings? Do you have a sense of that?
I think that's such a local decision. There are so many factors that go into how much counties and I'll go ahead and speak for some municipals too, how much they appropriate to public safety and law enforcement, and then all of the things that support that or are ancillary to that in terms of public health and social services and educational programs. I mean, it's everything is so interrelated, and that's I think one of the most challenging conversations that in a normal budget year a governing board would have to make is how much we have this much of the pie and how much is going to go to each of these things, and can there be coordination. And so I think that it would be such a local decision to say whether we're going to move funds, but it's very likely that those funds would need to support maybe something in a different way, and then they would just be moved somewhere else. And that would definitely be a local call for the governing board to make.
All right, let me share some information about the different organizations that you guys work for. I want to make sure everybody sees this before we leave. This is information about the League of Municipalities. The North Carolina League of Municipalities represents the 552 municipalities across the state. I'd like to do a special shout out to Rose Williams, who was really helpful to me today. You didn't see her on today's program, but a lot of great background information on cities and towns, the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners. Paige is their associate legal counsel. Thanks so much to them. That's how you get in touch with them. Both these organizations have special COVID-19 pages. There are a couple of other places that are real key players as we look toward this. The UNC School of Government is an incredible resource for training and other information about local government and the sort of information they need to have. They have a special COVID-19 page set up. If you can't deal with the long URL there, you can just find that off of sog.unc.edu. And the same is true for the Local Government Commission that really looks after the fiscal health of all these entities. You can find that on the Treasurer's site, nctreasurer.com. And again, they have a special COVID-19 resource. Ms. Pinder and Buncombe County Government, if you're interested in finding out more about them, is available here. And finally, Bethel Town Government and Mayor Gloristine Brown. You can find them at this link. The town of Bethel has old-time charm and family-friendly amenities. So if you haven't visited there, this is your chance to go there. Let me just close with a quick question to each of you as we look out on this. Paige, since you happen to have come up on the screen, what's your advice over the next few months to counties that as they're waiting for that last budget information to come in?
I think that there's a lot of good work already happening, Leslie, on that. I really think that just by nature of what local governments do and how counties are, they're trying to be very comprehensive and cautious. And so I think that out of necessity, there are decisions being made to how can we, most correctly spend and allocate the money that we may be getting from the federal government and from the state government. And there are a lot of, I would say, sources that are flowing in that local governments are trying to deal with and spend wisely. And so I think that just working with the small businesses and nonprofits in their areas, and working with taxpayers, and as we've seen in the chat, there are a variety of forms of relief and assistance that are coming and will continue to come. And so I think that all of those, I would say, kind of outlooks, while they may not be very sharp in terms of what we can see, I think that a lot of the daily practical work that local governments do is really going to serve them well as they try to figure out some of these really tough decisions that are going to come.
Ms. Brown, Mayor Brown, can you reassure us that our cities and towns are going to be there for us in the coming year?
Well, I'm looking at a crystal ball, and I'm hoping and praying that will happen. I just ask all of my colleagues and everyone that, we got to think smart, and we're going to have to do some things that we don't want to do. But at the end of the day, I'm asking everyone, we as the North Carolina Mayors Association, along with the county, have written letters to our legislators from the federal level, on the state level. I'm asking everyone to continue to bombard them with calls and letters, and keep pushing the issue that municipalities are in trouble, going to be in greater trouble if we don't get the help and assistance that we need. I thank God for nonprofits that are within our counties that has really been a help to us and sending out things to our citizens. And we get, they're reaching out, they're bringing meals. We're having people that are giving meals. We're having home supplies, personal items that are being donated that has helped a lot in the community. But and I say, if you don't mind me throwing this in, Leslie, please don't forget your census. We are pushing that everybody please check in. I'm checking in my community, even though I'm not a census taker, but I am really pushing hard, because those are dollars, hopefully somewhere, that can come back to our community. That would be a big help. But I'm asking that we're just going to continue to work hard, but we have to push our legislators to make them understand that we as local municipalities, we do need funding in order to keep functioning, and that to no fault of our own, that this hit us. And we are, if you don't mind me saying, I did hear somewhere that it was saying that a lot of us were not managing our monies properly, but I'm not going to buy that. But we just got hit, and I think we do need help. We have a lot of municipalities that are electric cities, and they are taking hits all over. And I had one that told me he was losing, I think, like $300,000 on that note, not even talking about the water and sewer. But we just need to keep working hard, and citizens as well, not just elected official, but you see the citizens, talk to your citizens and tell them to reach out to our legislators as well, to give us some back in there. We need some help, but we as elected officials, we got to keep working hard, and we got to keep pushing. But I'm praying that all of us will survive this pandemic.
Mayor Gloristine Brown, we can see why you are the head of the Mayor's Association this year. Thank you for that. Thanks to Paige Worsham for being with us. A reminder on the census, rough computation is each person that gets counted in North Carolina results in an additional $1,600 in federal aid that comes to the state every year. That's $16,000 over the next decade. If you're interested in that information, there's some more on our podcast, First and Future, which you can find at emergingissues.org. Our latest conversation is with two people who are actively working on the census. Closing thought on budgeting from David Allen of Randolph County, who says that they may well be able to make it through this year by using carryover funds, but next year is going to be a real challenge. And I think that's the same message sent by Ms. Brown and Ms. Worsham and Ms. Pinder. So thank you to all of you for being with us. And that is our show for today. We'll be back next week at our normal time, 9 a.m. on Thursday, with a program called Jumpstarting Connectivity with our guests, Veronica Creech from the city of Raleigh, Seth Irvin from Charlotte Mecklenburg Library, Michael Abensauer from the Cramden Institute, and Cheryl Dorsey from Build the Good. Great show. There will be a guest host, a special guest host. I'm going to be on vacation next week. Maggie Woods, who runs our Band NC program, is going to be guest hosting next week, and we're going to be looking at how we go forward from here when it comes to connectivity. A lot of people still working from home, a lot of people trying to figure out how their kids might learn from home in the coming year. If you have an idea for a show, we ask you to let us know. Let us know what your thoughts are. We would like to feature ideas that are on your mind and you care about. First and Future, our show is sponsored by Tony Brown, who's a member of our National Advisory Board, in honor this week of his daughter, Miss Julia Brown, North Carolina State All-American volleyball player, class of 2019. This show is produced by Greg Hedgepeth and James Herrick. Kirsten Chang gets the word out and gets our chat going. Renee Potts does our slides. Simone Kallman does our research. We really value having you with us each week. If you like today's show, there will be a recording posted on our website, emergingissues.org, by noon on Friday. If you're listening to a recording, please know that the slides are available on our website, emergingissues.org. I'm Leslie Bunny. Thanks for listening and participating. Stay safe. We'll see you in the future.